lot of times what I tell people is, if you have a really good sales organization leadership team, they are not going to let a significantly subpar manager stay for very long, right? Have that reflected in the overall culture and leadership. Because people say things like, I love this sales org, I just hate my manager. And I'm like, well, hang on a second. And they do. And I'm like, let's unpack that a little bit. Because if I really hate my manager, I probably don't like my sales org, because that sales org is empowering somebody that's so detrimental to my experience to be in a position of power, guiding me.
Hi, friends. Welcome to the Sales Enablement Podcast. I'm your host, Andy Paul. That was Ryan Walsh. He's the founder and CEO at RepVue. And in today's repeat conversation from the archives of the Sales Enablement Podcast, Ryan and I talk about how RepVue is challenging the status quo when it comes to getting a sales job and flipping the odds in the favor of the candidate during the hiring process. In our conversation, we dig into the data that RepVue collects to help inform sellers during a hiring process. And we also talk about additional data that RepVue could collect and might collect in the future to help sellers. We get into a couple of additional topics of prime concern to sellers, like what is sales work going to look like in the next couple of years, and what the impact will be for the individual seller. And we talk about quota. I mean, does quota still have relevance in sales? Well, you'll have to listen to find out. We get into all of this and much, much more. But before we get to Ryan, I want to remind you to subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen to it. And also want to remind you to check out my latest book, Sell Without Selling Out. It's a modern human-centric framework for increasing your win rates and shortening decision cycles without using the salesy behaviors that buyers dislike. It's available everywhere you shop for books, online and in stores. All right, let's jump into it with Ryan.
Ryan, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Andy. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you. So you're joining us from where?
I am in RepVue Worldwide headquarters, which is in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, just outside of the Raleigh-Durham area.
And are you like a UNC alum?
I am. So grew up in North Carolina, went to undergrad UNC Chapel Hill, and that was over 20 years ago, graduated, and have lived in the area ever since. So definitely a Tar Heel. My wife went to UNC. My brother went, her sister went, my brother-in-law, father.
So no pressure on your two kids who are, about 4 years away from applying, at least the oldest one. So no pressure to go to UNC?
Pave your own path, my friend. Pave your own path. Whatever, maybe other than the darker shade of blue down the street, we might have a problem with that one.
Oh, yeah.
But other than that, we're all good.
I would, as a parent, I would say if they could get into Duke, I would encourage them to go.
Yeah, no, like I said, I don't have any designs on what they want to do and where they want to go necessarily, as long as they're happy and they're excited about where they go, then I'll be excited about it too.
Yeah, great. So, well, tell us about RepVue. So, what was the motivation to start RepVue? What was happening in your world that inspired you to do this?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my career and my background is software sales, right? I've all the way from in the early years, kind of entry level sales. This is kind of pre SDRs necessarily.
Right.
And I spent many years as an enterprise SaaS enterprise account executive, carrying a quota. Year after year, I had the same business card, same job title for like 5 years. In today's day and age, that's like an eternity. People don't.
That's forever, right?
What are you still doing in that job? You've been there for like 3 years. This is
what's wrong. What's wrong with you?
Exactly, nothing. I was making good money. I was traveling. I was happy and I enjoyed what I did. But eventually moved into leadership roles and took over sales org, public SaaS company. For a few years, was a CRO there, and after I left that company, I did some consulting, essentially kind of the typical fractional CRO type stuff that a lot of folks do.
I did it. Yeah.
Yep. And I don't think that was ever going to be a long-term thing for me. It was good for a while, and I figured I'd go back and be an operator somewhere at a software company. But the challenge, your question was, what kind of spurred you to start RepVue? Really two things that I saw problematic, both in my tenure, issues that we faced, as well as other smaller companies when I was helping them, was not enough people are hitting quota, right? And the other one is related to the attrition of the sales team being close to 2x of non-sales team members. But the piece about quota attainment is interesting because you see all this funding, these big funding rounds, and you see these companies that are massively successful and growing and adding 200 millions of VC dollars or going public. Yet you still have 45% of the team is hitting quota, right? Well, what about the other? So, and I always tell people like the models, and I've done it. I've been there, right? I've been in that seat. Their model builds in your failure, right? As a salesperson, right? And even smaller companies, we have a sales team of 7. Well, there's 2 people that are carrying that team, right? And then you cycle through a bunch of others. So, or
they're just loading up the top of the funnel and playing the odds, basically.
Exactly. They're playing the odds with your livelihood as a sales, as an individual contributor, as an account executive or sales team member. They're playing the odds with your livelihood. So, not everything is as nefarious maybe as that sounds. And sometimes there's just the concept of, and I've hired plenty of people that I thought would be great that didn't work out. And I don't think it's their fault. They may have gone on to be great salespeople in other areas. It's just a fit issue, and I think you start to narrow in on why are both sides making bad decisions, and in particular, you look at the interview process, and it's such an important thing when you choose a job. Select that next sales org, right? It's your livelihood, your resume. You don't want to have those 3 quick job hops, that sort of thing, right? You want to be successful. And it's so important, yet the information flow is so imbalanced, right? All the information in the interview flows from candidate to company. Hey, HR phone screen, manager phone screen, bring Ryan in for an interview. We like Ryan, okay. Peer panel, disc assessment, role play, director, VP. I did a poll today on interview length and salespeople don't like long interviews. Like they don't want 6 stages. In any case, the point is all that information flows one way, but as maybe a mid-market account executive, what do you get? Hey, Ryan, we got 6 minutes left in the interview. Do you have any questions for us, right? Well, maybe it's 4 because I had to get my Starbucks. So you have 4 minutes left. Do you have any questions for us, right? So with all this disbound, the thought behind RepVue is there a platform that we could build and deliver deep insights to sales professionals such that they can consume information to make better choices for their careers, right? So it's a very data-driven approach. And I get the question all the time. I'll preempt it from you, Andy, but it's like, is this kind of like Glassdoor, or what is it? Like it's yes and no. I mean, we're very data-driven. So there's no written review in any situation. We've created and crafted a proprietary survey. Takes about 2.5 minutes. Salespeople go through, they take this little quick survey. When they're done, they're a RepVue user, it's anonymous, and they have access to all the data that we're collecting, right? And our job, my job, and RepVue's job is to take all this data and turn it into highly consumable, visually appealing profiles of what it's really like to work in the world's most well-known sales organizations. And so that's what we're building as on the user side is go to RepVue. It's your ultimate career resource for understanding whether you'd be a great fit at sales org XYZ, whether what the recruiters and hiring managers are telling you during the process is accurate, connect with other users who might have worked there to get a reference, and a whole bunch of check compensation, what do top earners make, what % of the team hits quota, what are the top paying sales orgs, all kinds of great valuable data, and our users just love it. And that's why people have maybe seen us around on LinkedIn, online. They've seen us and we've been growing simply because users just love the data, right?
But as you said, there are no written reviews.
It's not a written review. And so it's a structured survey. And so you actually, if you go to our website, we get this a lot. Hey, I looked for my sales org and I didn't see it. And usually the response is, well, it's probably been rated, but you won't see the actual published profile until it has 7 or more ratings that we can aggregate together, right? So there's some minimum kind of data threshold for us to feel comfortable that there's directional accuracy in the data set, right? And we're going to roll out some stuff where there can be like a little premium kind of spotlight page for startups or small companies that aren't published, but it won't have, even if it has a few ratings, it won't have any data until 7 or more ratings. Yep.
So a company's not paying to have their profile on the page, on this website, excuse me.
When a company gets 7 ratings, that company's profile is published. We don't call them, we don't ask for permission, nor do we ask for forgiveness in some cases when it might be warranted, if that makes sense.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. No, there's no, I mean, yeah, we are, RepVue is essentially people in investing in what you'll call a two-sided marketplace, where you have users on one side and you have companies or employers on the other. We're not going to charge our users. So as we continue to grow, we will charge employers. They'll be able to add videos to their pages, and you'll see if that employer is engaged with RepVue, because they probably have some videos and some other little things that they can add. Never will they be able to change the data. Never will they be able to alter the data. Never will they be able to strike down ratings or pull. It's just simply the facts are the data and the data are the facts, and you got to own it or not own it.
Yeah. So I mean, in addition to providing more information to sales candidates in order for them to make more informed decisions, it seems like an aspect of this is also about holding employers to account.
100%, right?
Yeah.
I mean, for sure, right? We want employers to be accountable for the environment that they provide to their sales professionals. And historically, it's a kind of backward-looking exercise, right? You go there, you get the job there, you got sold on all this stuff. This is really cool. I got this job. 6 months later, you're like, this is nothing like what I thought it was going to be, right? Mm-hmm. We're actually trying to flip that and make that a forward-looking exercise. Whereas if that sales organization environment is not up to standards of what it should be, sales professionals are not ever even going to take that job, right? They're not going to be able to... The employer's not going to be able to get the talent they need, because this information from crowdsource from the entire sales community is out there. So we're gonna flip it from a backward looking to a forward looking exercise.
Yeah, I mean, and part of that though, I think it seems like, based on the way you present the data, is that if somebody has a fair number of reviews and it's fairly positive, not reviews, but ratings, their what do you call the overall factor that you give someone?
Yeah, we have a RepVue score. Yeah,
RepVue score. So if the RepVue score is high, but they have a fair number of people who have submitted ratings, let's say 200, if there's sort of 3 people that are very dissatisfied, that's not going to take more than that to sort of move the needle on their rating, right?
Absolutely, right. Yeah. It's the law of large numbers, right? So a Salesforce has well over 400 ratings right now, right? Mm-hmm. So you think about the challenge with traditional review sites is like, I just pop on there and it's got 400 great ratings, but then somebody drops one in, or 400 great reviews, somebody drops one flaming review in at the very top, and it's like, oh my gosh. For ours, the score changes from 91.12 to 91.11, based on that submission. And I think that part of that's important, because you do, and then in our example, you can start to break that down by role as well. So you can see data on our pages. As the data gets large enough and sustainable enough, you'll see some compensation data, some other data, some quota attainment data based on the specific role. Absolutely. Yeah. Because big orgs, right? Some people have a phenomenal experience at a huge org in team A, and then some others, whether it's the manager, whether it's the process or the policies, it can be totally different.
Yeah. So you've got 7 primary factors that you measure: base compensation, incentive compensation structure, professional development and training, culture and leadership. I hope everybody's taking notes. Product market fit, inbound lead opportunity flow, and diversity and inclusion.
Yep.
And so what other things would you measure?
We get feedback a lot of times. Well, what about this? What about that? I think the number one thing so yes, that's great. Thank you. Those are the 7 sentiment categories that we measure on, right? So things that are very important to salespeople, and they're all important to salespeople, all those. And then below that, we also capture a data set related to the sales compensation for that particular rating submission as well. The most common requests that we get outside of those 7 is, I want to rate my manager. Okay, that's the most common.
I was going to ask that because, that's the hard thing, right, about the work experience is it's so boss specific.
It is, yeah. I think the reason that we've somewhat stayed away from that so far is like, number one, we're not really in the business, and we don't want to be really in the business of rating people. Okay,
Even shaming people, right? Yeah.
Especially when, and look, you can go look at other sites. You look at a Glassdoor has a CEO rating. That's a public figure essentially, right, at the CEO level. So you're not. Could we do a CEO rating? Yeah, maybe, but that's, neither here nor there. I want to rate my sales manager. The other thing is it just changes, right? It changes so often. The managers shift. You go on a different team. The manager goes back to IC. The manager's now a director. It's like it just wouldn't be a really good. And the other thing we have a rating. You mentioned it, the sentiment score for culture and leadership. A lot of times, what I tell people is, if you have a really good sales organization leadership team, they are not going to let a significantly subpar manager stay, for very long, right? Have that reflected in the overall culture and leadership. If you're like, man, because people say things like, I love this sales org, I just hate my manager. And I'm like, well, hang on a second, right?
But it's true. And people do.
And they do. And I'm like, let's unpack that a little bit, because if I really hate my manager, I probably don't like my sales org, because that sales org is empowering somebody that's so detrimental to my experience to be in a position of power, guiding me, right? And so then I look at it like, there's some inherent cracks in the overall leadership, whether they don't see it or whether they do see it and they fail to take action.
Right.
You know what I mean? So that it's one of those two things. So
but it happens a lot, though. I mean, it does. Yeah, I mean, a culture scores, I think, is great, but it's that experience is so specific that was the thing I was thinking about. Is okay, if you weren't going to, if you're going to add something, what would it be? And it's boss. But then, I don't think there's value in naming names and shaming people in this regard.
Right.
That makes it difficult to do. But it is
right.
I mean, even from like the Gallup scores about why people leave jobs and so on, is it's definitely about the manager. People are firing their manager by leaving.
Yeah, it absolutely is. One of the interesting things about the manager dynamic is that with this extreme growth, particularly in tech sales that we're seeing with significant venture capital rounds, companies going public, the pressure to hire so many more sales professionals and account executives and starting with SDRs, there's a lack of experienced leadership at the manager or director level. And what ends up happening is, hey, Andy was a top rep last year. He's now the manager, right? Mm-hmm. And sometimes that works great. Unfortunately, sometimes it doesn't work great, and you're really doing a disservice to Andy, who's now put in this position, whereas they're just trying to fill seats, and you don't have the infrastructure to support these management hires. And so, I think management is very, very critical. But yeah, to the original point, we're not going to be naming and shaming in the near term on what we're going to do.
But it does raise an interesting point, though, and that was one of the other areas I was going to ask you about that perhaps could be valuable is I think one of the most critical things that's happening in sales, and this is not new by any stretch of the imagination, but it seems more acute perhaps these days, is the lack of support of frontline managers in sales, the lack of support of actually management up and down the chain is they're not enabled with the tools to be able to effectively coach, to effectively manage people to higher levels of performance. I mean, this is there's science, there's other professions like one I often refer to in this podcast is professional soccer, where you have to get licensed and you have to take courses on performance improvement and psychology and motivation, all these other things that we just don't bother training managers on. To your point, we just throw them in the job and say, this could be a high growth path. And not only are you going to sink or swim based on your ability to manage people, which you've never done before, but you also have to hire a ton of people.
Mm-hmm. Totally agree.
Seems like that could be an interesting score. I'm not sure what you would call it, but just how a company supports the professional development of management versus sellers.
Yeah, for sure. So just to add on to that, right? I think the amount of dollars flowing into professional development and training broken down by a leadership relative to individual contributor, right? There's a huge gap.
Yes.
Who's coaching the coaches, right? Is your point, right? Like,
no.
Right? Like, are you coaching them on, like, when I first became a manager, right, I kind of figured it out, right? Like I kind of figured, nobody taught me how to run a good pipeline review. I'd been in some pipeline reviews. Maybe some of them were bad, maybe some of them were good, and I kind of figured it out. Nobody taught me how to work somebody through a performance improvement plan. And it's like, well, here's the policy, right? Here's the policy, right? Nobody taught me how to, how to effectively coach up my team on call coach. Like, well, I'd done a bunch of calls, so I kind of know what's a good call. And like, so there's a lot of that, particularly, and I think you get an acute issue there when companies are growing so fast, right? And they're that part of the business is behind, right? So I fully agree. I mean, I will say a lot of what we do at RepVue is focused on the non-manager, the individual contributor, right? That vast sea of individual. We do have ratings from sales management. It's not exceptionally broken out. Like you have a VP, is a VP or is it a regional director, that sort of thing. But to your point, yes, that is a huge, and then that certainly plays a huge role in the experience that the individual contributor has within their sales organization, right?
Yeah, and the thing that strikes me as being so unnecessary about that situation is that we're always quick to blame, right? So who's to blame for sellers not hitting quota? Mm-hmm. Is it the seller or is it the manager? Mm-hmm. And we could sit here and talk about that for days, probably, right? A little bit of both, let's say, or equally. Sure. We'll say equal shares of both. I probably really believe that's more the manager's responsibility than the seller's. But we can't blame the managers because we do nothing to help them be prepared to help the sellers. Mm-hmm. I again raised this theoretical scenario on the show all the time. Is I think the latest figure I saw from LinkedIn State of Sales report from maybe 2020 or 2019 was $15 billion a year spent on sales training. I'd seen another figure is 20%, 20 billion, excuse me, of which maybe 10% is spent on training managers. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'd be surprised.
So my thought is, well, what if we flipped the ratio? Did something crazy. What if we spent 90% of our sales training budget on enabling all levels of sales management? Mm-hmm. And 10% on sellers, because the sellers, when you do surveys, and the survey's done, that they actually report that the way they're learning most about sales is from peers.
Right. Well, I think yes, and then I think the other piece of that is if you flip that, like you suggested, and you push all those dollars into the management, you don't need the rep training anymore, right? Because the managers are effectively doing that portion. They're picking up the slack, right? Yep. I mean, and probably in a better way. Not only that, but then you're also empowering that whole, instead of relying on a crutch of, and first of all, I'm not an expert in the sales training marketplace necessarily. Certainly would expect it's highly, highly fragmented, right? And you're not going to get a consistent experience. I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm just saying there's going to be different training styles, approaches all over the place, and every company is going to be different. But the ability to push all the resources into training the managers takes care of the other problem naturally, which would be incredible.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's my soapbox item that I keep talking about. We're gonna change that. All so right. I'll sign you up to the movement. You'll be part of it.
I'm in.
You're in. Okay. So a question though, we talked about, sellers oftentimes leave jobs because of managers, but and I think you've written about this recently, is there's also the shiny object syndrome that sellers fall for. And so it's like, how can I think one of the challenges we have in the profession and B2B sales is how do we get people to be more patient? Because I believe that some of the challenges we have as a profession, and especially in B2B tech sales, is that people don't stay one place long enough to really learn what they need to learn before they move on. Yeah. And you give the example about working your way up to higher deal sizes, for instance, as an individual contributor, which I think is a great way to look at it. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. How do we start addressing this? It's and I know it's external forces, the lure of money and so on. But at some point, especially given the failure rate of startups, is, sometimes it makes sense just to stay.
Yeah. The shiny, it's really bad right now. And what's happening is that the sales professionals are getting hit up by recruiters all the time, all the time. And the messaging all sounds the same, right? So problem number one is unicorn A versus unicorn B are both saying the same things, and they have the same foosball table, and they have the same, whatever.
Aspiring unicorn A versus aspiring unicorn B, yeah.
Yeah, or either or, or all the above. And they all have the same message, right? And so you're constantly being barraged with, and then you're thinking, oh man, I've been doing pretty well, but I missed that number last month. And then, well, maybe I'll be better over here. And this goes back to, I made the point early on in our conversation here, like I had the same job for 5 years. It wasn't like I became like the senior and then the senior this and then this. And it was literally like the same title, like for 5 years. And at the time, I didn't think that was a bad thing. I never even thought, oh, this is bad, right? I just thought like, hey, I'm doing pretty well. I could probably go get another job if I needed to, right? Because I'm a seller and I'm experienced in software and the money's okay. And I never even thought, but it is such a different environment now. That wasn't that. I mean, it's 15 years ago, so it's an eons ago for some people. But the sellers today are they're seeing part of it. You look at social media, you look at the recruiters hitting you up. Hey, so-and-so, you look at even Facebook, man, all my buddies over here, he just got this boat or whatever, whatever it is. And everything is in your face. And there's just this pressure, not even just in sales, but in society that we have, that if you're not if you're totally hitting grand slams every month, then you're falling behind. And so, well, I'm going to go try my luck over at this other company. And I don't think you realize that hitting the reset button, even if you end up at a great sales org, hitting the reset button will cost you, right? It's, in time and in money, ramp up and, so I don't know if that's really an answer to that, but I think it's just your question was, how do we get people to be more patient? It's like, I don't know, but we need to get people to be more patient.
Yeah, for their own good. I mean, part of it is, if you talk to a VC, for every 10 investments they make, 2 turn out good, 4 are and 4 are nothing.
Right.
So if sellers knew that was the odds, right?
Yeah.
Would you still be rushing to drop the good thing perhaps where you're at, or the risk of something that's, if you get 2 sort of blow-ups in a row, then when people start looking at you for the third, it's human nature. They're going to look at you a little differently.
Right. And we are trying to help, with RepVue, right? I think shining a light on, let's try and help some people avoid some mistakes, right?
Yep.
Let's deliver some data and insights. And it's crowdsourcing, right? It's like if you knew, sometimes I like to describe it, if you had a really good friend that worked at software company XYZ and software company XYZ is now calling you, first thing you're going to do is reach out to your friend, right? And be like, hey, what's the deal? Right? Well, that's what we are, that friend, right? That's kind of how we look at it, right? We're that friend, reach out to us and we'll give you that insight and that information, right? Because that's really the most fail-safe way to know, if your friend works at the company in a similar role, they'll give you the scoop, the good and the bad and the ugly, and make a decision on that, Yeah.
All right. Well, I've got a couple more questions. One about another potential point of measurement for you. Because you wrote, I don't know, maybe it was today, you posted on LinkedIn or yesterday about, you say, are we finally at a point we can stop talking about returning to normal?
Yes.
Pandemic or not, it ain't happening.
Yes.
And what a lot of people are writing about these days is that, it's not going to return to whatever it was before. But that one of the dangers of this happening is that people think it's somewhat inevitable. There's going to be sort of these 2-tier career tracks that people go on, those who are willing to come into the office more regularly and those who aren't. So it sort of becomes like a career choice. I mean, I was talking about this with somebody the other day. It says, like, when my dad was coming up in his career, if you wanted to get ahead, you had to be willing to move, right? So even before I was born, my folks were moving around, and they moved around a couple times, well, 3 or 4 times after I was born. And so I wonder whether it's, sort of getting to this point where it's, people have to make a choice, because I can see, human nature. You got managers, so tethered to their activity metrics, which are these superficial measures. It doesn't take a stretch of imagination to think that, they look more favorably on people that are willing to come in more often, get more face time with them. So I was just wondering whether, a long way of saying, maybe one of the measures at some point becomes office centricity.
Yeah. Well, we are going to start tracking more of that as we go forward, right? And we kind of have some of that, but it's really not that hard to track. And I think really, are you going to require people to be in the office? And if so, what % of time? And I think if you do that, and if that % of time is probably more than 50%, you're going to be at a significant talent disadvantage. And, it's like what, and so, and this is what I hear sometimes from people who kind of look at on the other side of that, which is like, well, this is how we kind of define and manage our culture through our office and our in-person environment. It's like, what does culture mean to you? Like to me, I think culture, like empowering my people, providing them a great work environment. And I'm not saying a great physical work environment. I'm saying a great, we call it emotional work environment, a great supported work environment. And I'm not saying going into the office is bad, because it's not. And there's benefits to it. We don't have an office with RepVue. We have a few people here in the Raleigh-Durham area, and we get together every couple of weeks for an office day, quote unquote, air quotes office day. But it is, but I just think that the vast majority of employees that are in the information space, however broadly you want to define that, where they don't need to be, in front of maybe a finance terminal or something that's high security, that they're going to want the flexibility, right? And I think a lot of those people do enjoy going to the office and being with their peers, but what's more important is the flexibility to have their own schedule and kind of work around that. So if they're, first of all, if you're doing like, hey, it's 4 or 5 days in the office, you're going to be at a significant talent disadvantage. It's going to be, and so I think your point was, back in the day, you got to be willing to move. Like, yes, true. Although now I don't think you're seeing it's like, hey, the great companies are going to have their people in the office. So if you want to have an incredible career path and work those great, you got to be willing to be flexible and go in the office. I think you're probably going to see the opposite, which is over time, many of the great companies are going to embrace the definition of what flexibility means as defined by their employees, right? So I think it's going to change, and I think it's going to continue to evolve further away from where it was in the past, as well as as newer generations enter the workforce, not ever even of knowing what we knew even 5 to 6 years ago, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm absolutely in agreement in terms of that. Especially in sales, the flexibility, the need to be in the office, just not there. But I'm not as optimistic about sort of the human nature that's going to drive those decisions. And, so much about sales even today is about sort of overweening control, sense of needing control. But unfortunately, I can see, and I don't like it, but I can see this, companies unnecessarily calling people back. But we'll see. I don't have a crystal ball. It's just my read of things.
Yeah, just to respond to that, right? I think let's play that out in a real world example, which is I'm hiring a team of 12 entry level SDRs that may be day one out of college.
Yeah.
Right. So that's the example, right, that we're thinking about when it's like, well, I gotta be on top of them, and I gotta, make sure they're yeah, certainly you can do like activity metric. You can do the software can handle the tracking mechanism of it. And then there's the coaching mechanism of it. So I think about it more as, how are you adapting systems and processes to understand that you won't be able to be on top of them all the time, right? Whether it's Zoom type technologies or whether it's, just Slack, Zoom, all this other stuff. Can it replace, and at first glance, you think, no, it can't replace being there right on top of them. Okay, well, maybe you have a couple days, maybe it's like 2 days in the office. And then it's like, well, smart people need to be figuring out, how can I empower my team, but also coach my junior team members effectively? And that's what's going to, I think that's what's going to separate the okay companies, the great companies from the okay companies, is they're able to kind of cross that chasm and figure that stuff out.
Yeah, I agree. But I think the unknown is that people are still people, and we're social animals. And that didn't change just on the basis of the pandemic. And yet, yeah, there are a lot of people who want to have you believe that it has. And so that's why I think it's less certain, right? That, at least in my mind, what the end result will be. I don't have a crystal ball for it, but I think that, yeah, I remember back, it was a couple decades ago, building offices around the world, putting sellers in, or even hiring remote salespeople within the States. Is one of the things we had to screen for is, how independently could these people work? Because it wasn't innate for everybody to be able to work independently. And yet now we're making a huge assumption that as humans, everybody's sort of changed, and their default mode is they know how to work independently without other people around and be satisfied by it. And I think we're going to find out whether that's a good assumption or not.
Yeah. Yeah. We're on that. Yep.
Yeah.
It's not going to be easy. There's going to be challenges.
Yeah. And I think eventually people want to be together, but we'll find out.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just not every day.
Just not every day. Well, yeah. I mean, and I think that's fine, right? I always sort of had that flexibility to some degree or another in my career being in sales. But
also you can, I think psychologically what you're saying makes sense, but would you say people want to be together? Okay. Yes. I agree with that. What if I said people want to be together with the other coworkers that were hired by the other managers at their, you're put together with a group of people that, so it's like, can you, my question or point would be, well, can you get that people want to be together outlet through something non-work related?
A good question. And the answer to that is we don't know, but, independent of what was happening, pandemic wise, we also know that, the impact of social media, one impact of social media was, people being more isolated.
Right.
So yeah, it's multifactorial. I said I don't have the crystal ball, but my gut feel tells me that, yeah, more flexibility required just because a greater diversity of people in the workforce that shouldn't be penalized because they need the flexibility.
Yes. Yeah.
For sure. A lesson's been learned during the pandemic.
For sure.
So the last area I wanted to get into in the time we have remaining is another interesting post you wrote on LinkedIn is part of a poll you did, which you said, are you just complaining or is there a legit issue with your quota? And so I was wondering what motivated you to write that?
What motivates me to write stuff like that, and in particular that, is the concept of how well does a seller actually know how their quota was actually constructed, like the mechanical makeups of their quota. Like, why is my quota 600K, right? Because sure, yeah, it's easy to complain. Like, my quota is out of whack, right? Like, my quota is too high. Well, is it? I don't know. Is it too high? Or and I think there was I probably asked this in a previous poll, which is like, how actually do you actually know? I'd have to go dig it up. Do you actually know specifically how the number, your quota, your number was calculated? And there were definitely more no's than yeses. They don't know specifically, so for example, is it a bottoms up quota? Is it a top down quota? Is it a, is it a territory kind of makeup quota, and so it's kind of like, are you just complaining? Like, well, everybody can complain. It's your right. It's everybody's right to complain. But let's unpeel the onion just a little bit and say, like, well, why do you think your quota is bad? If it's just because you never hit it, that doesn't mean the quota is wrong. That just means you never hit it. So I want to unpack and understand how much visibility is there into the actual construction of quotas, and sales orgs should should be real clear on that. I don't think they are.
All right, let me phrase the question or pose the question to you differently.
Yeah.
So by your own data, their own RepVue data, a minority of B2B sellers are hitting their quota based on the ratings that you're getting. And this is not just your data, it's been going on for forever, as far as I can tell, but seemingly has gotten more pronounced over the last 10 years, at least based on like reports from CSO Insights when they were doing their reports and so on. Mm-hmm. You also recently wrote that 31 of an approximately 1,000 sales teams reporting on RepVue only 31 had 75% or more of their team at quota, which is 3.1%. Mm-hmm. See, I look at the whole quota issue a little differently, which is, what's the purpose of quota? Why do we need it? When so few people are making quota, hasn't it lost its value? Don't we need another way to measure performance in sales for sellers? I mean, there's this famous economic law called Goodhart's Law that says when a measure becomes a target, it loses all value as a measure.
Yeah,
which is what we've done with quota. We've turned it into a target, and people optimized the process, and it no longer accurately reflects performance, especially when quotas are arbitrarily set. So why do we still have quota? And it's not to put you on the spot, I'm just sort of saying that more in general.
Well, setting quota aside, what define? Like, I like to back it up a little bit. Like, what defines success in a role? Like, how do you like? And you always want to know, like, because we think about, even in my current job now at RepVue, we're thinking, hey, we're going to hire customer success person here. We just posted a role, and it's like, all right, well, one of the first things I talk about with another member of my team that's going to be running point on that is like, well, what in a year, what will we say? What metric or what thing will we look at where we can say this person was really successful? Like, what have they done? You know what I mean? Like, is it retention of customers? Is it some other metric? Is it some, like, SAT scores or, your NPS or whatever you want to call it? Maybe, I don't know. So I think particularly in a sales role, there always will have to be some kind of metric, right? I think what you're getting at is, are we just like, it's like the goalpost is so far out there right now for so many people. Is it just wrong? Like, the whole thing. And I don't know, there's a blog post that I wrote about 4 or 5 months ago that says missing quota, like as a an epidemic or whatever, and why is that? And I think a lot of it goes back to what we talked about earlier, which is the models starting from the CFO, CEO, and to some degree CRO too, that build in like, hey, we got these investors and we got an outside number, we got an inside number, then I got my manager number, and then I got my VP number. We've got these 4 or 5 numbers, right? And it's like, well, ultimately, if we hit that one number at the very top, which might be visible outside of this boardroom or outside of this management meeting, maybe to investors, like, we hit that one number, but then each level you go down lower, you're a little further away, you're a little further away, and you're a little further away. And when you get to the individual contributor, how far away are you? You're as far away as 55% of the people miss quota, 45% of the people hit quota, and guess what? The number at the very top, it was hit. And so you're basically, and this is what I was saying earlier, you're going, and so then, well, how do you reset that, right? And it's just been ingrained so long, and I've been part of it at the individual level, at the director level, and at the CRO level. I've seen it all, right? And it's one of the things that I just, I'm not sure I have the answers on how to change that necessarily, because it's just the way that things are done, and it's, there's a lot of big dollars involved in all this, as you know.
But you said it's the way things are done, which is, hey, if that was the case, we would never ever sell anything, right? Because every time I talk to a customer, they'd be, well, that's the way we're doing things. Why change?
Yeah.
And I think we have a very good reason to change, which is it's meaningless at this point in time. When so few people are meeting it, it's become meaningless.
Yeah.
And so I think there are alternatives. One is a true measure of sales productivity. That we measure productivity in sales the way the rest of the world measures it, not quantity of activities, but in how much revenue per hour of selling time are you generating. Now, if you could measure that, which I've done before in managing sales teams, then, then you could set how can we help this person become more productive in the time when they're actually selling? And you could set productivity goals, or you could set a rate of improvement on productivity goals. I really believe that the future is we need to look at a basket of measures instead of just one.
Yeah, I mean, I think I like that, although the problem is at some level that is disjointed with that top number, which might not, which is just the one top line. Right. There's some, so that's going to require some work to kind of conjoin the levels from board to the rep that has the productivity per hour, or however you want to look at that.
Right. I mean, I would suspect that the data that you have is somewhat skewed by the fact that it's primarily tech companies, right, on RepVue, that are oftentimes investor funded, that have this particular broken dynamic with top-down, over-optimistic goals being given to sellers. But I think that one of the things that's sort of ironic about this is that when we create the situation where so few people, as a percentage, experience success, we lose the opportunity to encourage and motivate them, because the way people are motivated is through success.
Mm-hmm. Well, and the interesting thing about most of our data is tech. We have, we're not exclusive, but most of it is. And the other thing is the amount of dollars, right? A top performing tech salesperson, as you know, there is a lot of money that they can earn on an annual basis. And so it enables companies to hire 100 reps, knowing that, hey, 30 of them are going to do really, really well. 30 of them are going to just do okay. And 40 of them are really not going to do anything at all, because the dollars. And so there is the concept of a distribution, right? The distribution of the payout, across the org as well, right? So is it maybe we should do, instead of a 50-50, maybe it should be a 65-35, or there's other ways to look at it. I'm not advocating necessarily for any of them right now, but to your point, there are there are levers that can certainly be pulled.
Right. Okay. Well, Ryan, thank you very much for joining me. This was great.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
If people want to learn more about RepVue,
yeah,
how should they do that? Or connect with you?
We're very easy to find. We're all over LinkedIn, RepVue, RepVue. Although we actually do also own RepView. So if you get confused and type that in, you'll likely end up at the right place. We're not a French company. We just like the 6-letter URL. I'm easy to find on LinkedIn as well. Our team is easy to find on LinkedIn. Just go to RepVue.com, take 2 minutes, submit a rating of any sales org, any B2B sales org where you've worked, and then you can access all of the data that we have, all the compensation data, who's making what, all that kind of stuff. And I think if you're a sales professional listening to this, you'll love it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I agree. You definitely should check it out. Brian, thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it. It's great.
Okay, friends, that's it for this episode. First of all, I want to thank you for taking the time to listen. I am so grateful for your support of this show. And I want to thank Ryan Walsh for sharing his insights with us today. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to this podcast, Sales Enablement with Andy Paul, on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. So thank you for your help with that. And thank you so much for investing your time with me today. Until next time, I'm your host, Andy Paul. Good selling, everyone.